Welcome to the Place of Rest. My name is Jonathan Boyce, Director of Conversation and Education Expansion at R.E.S.T, and it's my pleasure to present to you our newest season of the R.E.S.T podcast. Here at R.E.S.T, our aim is to give you language that helps you reason through principles and explain truth, to educate you on how to respond from a place of wonder and your deepest convictions, and to equip you to plant seeds of hope that last beyond your lifetime. Today, our host Virginia Dixon sits down with Kristen Ferguson, a member of the R.E.S.T team, to discuss the importance of the words we use to communicate the application of R.E.S.T principles, as well as to honor mothers as we look forward to Mother's Day arriving soon. We invite you to embrace truth and enter the place of rest.
Kristen, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
I am a mom, so that's really exciting that we're here for the Mother's Day podcast. We were introduced quite a few months ago now. Was it back in September, I think? So a few months now where we were introduced by a mutual friend and immediately felt drawn to the messaging and the vision of R.E.S.T.
Kristen, I'd like everybody to have a little bit of context of why we asked you to join our team. And thankfully you accepted, so.
Yes, when we were introduced, you and your team were looking for some marketing, and that's the background that I had was words and communicating with an audience that has led me down this road with you guys and kind of clearing up the messaging. That's why I think we were connected in the beginning and we just really resonated with each other when we met.
What stands out to you most, having a background in messaging and communicating complex ideas to a broader audience, which is what we're about? And fundamentally, we're about displacing confusion, chaos, and dis-ease in a myriad of disciplines and a myriad of subjects, but certainly as it pertains to the things that destabilize people's lives. And you're pretty much in the background of a lot of intense conversations about very serious things. And I just wonder, bird's eye view here for a second.
Yeah.
What stands out the most to you as unique? What have you found compelling about your work with us? Because you often say, wow, I wish I had more time to dedicate only to this because you
Yes.
saw the value of it. Talk to us about that a minute.
Yes, I love the word unique and the word compelled that you just used because I do feel compelled to the message of rest. And one of the unique things that I have found is the story and the pilgrimage and the way to the freedom that we seek is through our stories and through the stories of our parents and just the generations that have come before us. And I think that that is really unique to R.E.S.T and to what you do, Virginia, is R.E.S.T isn't afraid to dig down deep with people and to pull out their stories.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I'm finding most relevant in terms of what we have to offer that's different is how we do it in the context of really complex things, complex developments, complex conversations we have to have, competing worldviews, competing ideas, where these religious paradigms often, right, or political posturing can be so divisive. We really are just in pursuit of what's true and what's not about everything. But sometimes when we have to show up to these deeper conversations, it's certainly dealing with issues of everything from autoimmune diseases to cancer to these competing ideas that create a lot of havoc in our lives. We really manage successfully to stay out of the fringe and out of divisive language and unproductive ways of communicating things about what unites us as human beings to reconcile that conflict. But I do think we're managing slowly. This is a very complex task, but we're managing slowly to invite people to reason over ideas in pursuit of what's right and what's wrong, instead of just being informed by our political convictions or our religious worldviews. I think things are becoming serious enough, complex enough, and our marriages, our families, our children, our businesses, our nation is unraveling at a rate that I think it's imperative that we begin to say, wait a minute, instead of approaching subjects, personal, corporate subjects, themes, with language of dogmas, why don't we begin to peel back the layers of what's true and what's not? It's a difficult task, but you're really doing a fantastic job challenging us to make rest more relevant, applicable, and perhaps more accessible to our listening audience. So thank
Yeah.
you.
And R.E.S.T does have such a beautiful language.
The language of liberty, so people
Yeah.
can live free.
Yeah. It's a matter of connecting that language with what we all are seeking for ourselves, which is that freedom. And I think that's one of my favorite parts of the vision of R.E.S.T is the invitation. That word compels me as well. The word invite, to have that warmth to it. There's this warmth to you, Virginia, that I've always felt, and it's very inviting. And so I love that. I love bringing a word invitation to the messaging of R.E.S.T because it is
Yeah.
an invitation.
We have to abandon these polarizing positions and dogmas that we approach subjects. Again, whether we're dealing with cancer, whether we're dealing one member of the family thinks you need to go with allopathic, another thinks, no, I need to go to integrative. I can't tell you how much division that discussion brings in families. Or
Yeah.
psychological issues. You know, there's people that want to immediately medicate, and there's others that are saying, wait a minute, I need to get to the root cause of this. And that can be very polarizing. There's questions about education and the breakdown of society, the breakdown in our school systems, the breakdown in our economic, the breakdown in our political system. There's confusion, chaos, and dis-ease in so many facets of our life that I do think we need to learn, acquire the discipline of engaging people in conversations with a measure of curiosity,
Yeah.
sensitivities for the fact that we may disagree, but that doesn't make us enemies.
Right.
And we need to have tolerance for the differences in ideas. I just want to say thank you so much. These are difficult things to talk about, but you're so important to us in helping us flush some of this out. We're just in the beginning of a long haul,
Yeah.
but it's a good beginning.
Yeah.
Since starting to work with us, how has your understanding of rest informed you as an individual? Is there something specific that stands out? Somebody, for example, says being in the presence of Virginia is like being in the presence of a velvet brick. She says really, really sharp things, but with
Yes.
measured sensitivity. But truly and sincerely is because I have so much compassion for the human condition. And it's something we all share. We all have the same limitations and challenges. We just experience things at different times. But I do think we're living in a time where we have to have the conviction to rise up and live with measures of integrity. And that means relational, emotional, and spiritual truth. And we need to show up whole. That is the measure of our wholeness. And I wonder, this is a tough question, but how has having to wrestle with some of these ideas and the things we throw at you, and by the way, you're still in the learning process, but
Right.
how has that informed your personal life? Have you wanted to be more refined in your thinking? Did you want to focus your time and efforts differently than you have been? How has it informed how you live, how you plan, how you're thinking, how you're parenting, any area of your life?
One of the things that draws me in so much is the story. And so really digging into what my story is and my childhood, my, adolescence, digging deep into that and letting some of the things that I have learned from rest and even just literally like literal rest, being quiet and digging deep into the weeds of what it is that is causing things like my anxiety or whatever it is. Those are things that were kind of brushed to the side. And very recently, I listened to a podcast of yours about the barriers to healing. And one thing that you said is what is forgotten cannot be healed. And that resonated with me. And so I think as I have been digging through the messaging of rest and everything that you put out there, and there's so many beautiful golden nuggets that you say often, I take those and I do apply them to myself. And I have been finding more space for quiet and for rest, even on going on neighborhood walks. I mean, that's just a literal application of what I'm able to do and not filling my mind with music or with podcasts or audiobooks, but to be silent.
Yeah, because we look so much outside of ourselves for answers. But the conflict, we're told for sure in the book of James, there's arguing and quarreling among us. There's confusion, chaos, and disease among us because we're conflicted within ourselves. But if we don't pause to ask ourselves the hard questions, why did I react that way? That person wasn't finished. I interrupted them 3 times. Why can't I sleep? What happened today? I noticed that I am not able to ask questions. When somebody's speaking to me, I'm quickly firing back a response. They didn't even finish their comment.
Yeah.
Not why did they get so mad at me? It's why did I interrupt them 3 times? And I think there is a way to turn the confusion, chaos, and disease that we're experiencing around in one generation, but it's going to require us to individually step into a place of rest and ask ourselves the hard questions.
Yeah.
You're really a great thinker in terms of sifting through a lot of complex things and finding sound bites to put on social media. We need to discuss hard things and we need to discuss the ways we reason, the ideas we hold on to, why we hold on to them, the origin of those ideas,
Yeah.
and how they're impacting our lives and how they're informing how we show up in relationship with our immediate family, our extended family, with our colleagues, and friendship. And certainly on these social platforms, how are we showing up? There is so much trash being spewed. We need to put an end to this, but we can't put an end to that discourse if we don't harness the conversations that take place within ourselves. You've come to know our education content in a unique way, and that you get to communicate it in, I don't know if fun, but in creative and compelling, inviting, and simple ways. What have you found is your favorite and most useful application of rest? The anatomy of descent, understanding the mission of rest, the vision of rest, the pilgrimage of rest, the anatomy and physiology of rest? Or is it the age of grace?
Under the umbrella of the mission and the core values of rest, those have definitely made an impact on me. Even just in how I do sift through things is the love, integrity, and what is sacred, which are the core values of rest.
That's interesting you mentioned that because those core values are really the spine of our
It really is
entire
it.
corporate
Yeah.
structure.
As I continue to navigate through the content and through the course and through the 40 days of rest, that is a personal application that I continue to take is loving well and showing up with integrity, even in my small sphere of, my family and valuing what is sacred, like what is sacred to me. But also, I kind of mentioned it before, it's the generations, the generational conflict and the generational confusion, chaos, and disease. You just don't realize how much it impacts you, even if you were removed from it, if that makes sense. Even
Well,
if
when you think that your constitution was in the womb of your great grandmother and your
yes,
mother,
yes,
and
yeah,
the eggs, right? The ovum. I mean, it is, we were there.
yeah.
And then
I don't remember who you quoted. You quoted a doctor who had said something along the lines of your parents' psychology becomes your biology or the biology
Dr.
of the children.
Sabat, Dr. Renault, Dr. Reiki Hammer.
That was like, first of all, like kind of a mind-blowing moment for me, but definitely an aha moment of how generations do impact, even though I'm removed from it, even though my childhood was a lovely childhood. But generationally, I know what has happened in generations past in my family. And so really starting to dig into that for myself has been so eye-opening.
Well, the reality is simply stated, we're removed. We feel removed from the experiences, the life of our ancestors, but they're not removed from us.
Mm,
And when you think just 2, 3, 4, 5 generations back. You're
Mhm.
talking about a generation's 40 years. 3 times 4 is 12. That's 120 years, right? 4 times 4 is 16, 160 years, almost 200 years.
Mhm.
So you think, wow, that's very accessible to us. And what we cannot recall is in our memory. And many times, that's why I believe we need to be careful about the judgment we exercise against
Yeah.
each other, the judgments we impose on each other. I think it's completely unjust. We need to ask questions
Mhm.
because that person may be carrying a lot of things, as are you, and as am I, that we don't fully understand. But
Yeah.
now, we know how to trace and how to access and document the narrative and the implications it's having, certainly on our physiology, especially as battle disease states. We
Yeah.
see that, in fact, yeah, the psychology of our ancestors did in fact become the biology. Now, we're not enslaved by that, right? Because there's a spiritual constitution to this. We're just talking about anatomy and physiology, but there
Yeah.
is a spiritual constitution to these dynamics that can turn everything on its head. And we spent a lot of time really making a case for that as we work with people closely on a one-on-one or on intensive retreats, and certainly in our education model.
Mhm.
But thank you for sharing that. It is significant. It is important. We need to continue to find ways to communicate these ideas in simple ways. So instead of judging each other, we can learn to become curious about each other and ask
Yes.
questions. And the
Yeah.
probing questions aren't to get information. The probing questions is for the sake of seeing what is sacred about another person, stepping into intimacy. Intimacy has nothing to do with sexuality. It has to do with soul connections,
Yeah.
with our shared human experiences. And I
Yeah.
think that is how we're going to begin to heal, turn this thing around.
This is Jonathan back here for a quick update. Many of our listeners have been asking when Virginia is going to write a book about rest. Well, good news, it's almost here. We will be announcing the launch of her book shortly, and if you would like to be a member of the launch party, visit theplaceofrest.com/contact. Fill in your name, email address, and a short note stating you would like to be added to the book launch email notification list. Stay tuned in future episodes for more details. And now, back to the conversation.
I think it is beautiful how intimate our stories are. And the pilgrimage, I love that word, pilgrimage. It just feels so appropriate for our lives. And the word intimate is also just sticks out to me as something that rest draws us into.
Recently, I heard a gentleman, he was a bishop who was attacked. It was a religious attack while he was in the pulpit. He's from Australia. He gave one of the most beautiful talks about what is sacred about our common humanity. And he talked about how in this day and age, we talk a lot about rights and human rights,
Yeah.
but we don't talk about value and worth.
Yeah.
But there can be no rights granted by man when we don't see the value and the worth in our Trinitarian constitution, spirit, soul, and body, in the Trinitarian constitution of a human being, spirit, soul, and body. As it rings true that the Creator identifies himself as having a spirit, a soul, and a body, and the Trinitarian constitution of his being.
Yeah.
Now, ours is obviously it's self-evident and it appeals to our natural affection. There were a spirit working through a soul and a body. We see that.
Mhm.
And any of us who've had the privilege of being present when somebody's passing away, we see that the spirit
Oh.
leaves, a mass leaves the room, that
Mhm.
occupied space.
I have
And
experienced that, yes.
if we, yes, and if we don't understand, if we talk about our rights, my right, your right, and we all don't step into rest, recognizing something greater than our rights overrides this sense of entitlement that we have to everything, from opinion to property to everything. But if we don't say, wait a minute, there's something greater than rights, and that is value and worth. And again, we see the value and the worth of a person because it's directly attached and connected to the spiritual constitution of that person. Because
Yeah.
again, when that person dies, something really sacred leaves that room and you feel it, you see it. And I think this conversation is important because as mothers, we give life. God
Yeah.
says He gave life to us. And He gave us life because of what? He placed great value. We are great worth. And our rights come from Him because He made us like Him to have great value and worth. So we can't protect human rights, right? We can't advance the cause of human rights if we neglect our value and our worth and our connection to the Trinitarian constitution of who God says He is. But as a mother, in honor of Mother's Day, I want to focus on how this is changing you as a woman, as a wife, as a mother, certainly as a businesswoman, because we've got
Yeah.
to engage in these conversations differently.
It's humbling that as a mother, that is what is part of our job, especially when we have just been talking about generations and value and worth and humanity. I think what it comes down to for me is being rooted in love and what, like, just back to those core values, which may just become my life core values, honestly, at this point, where it's just like rooted in love and knowing what's sacred and what you said, like we are sacred, our souls, our spirits, our bodies are. And so knowing that I'm raising these little children who my kids now are 11, 9, and 5. So it's a very interesting time of motherhood in knowing that we are shaping the future generation and knowing that I am healing myself while raising kids, that I'm also healing along the way, knowing that there's generational stuff happening there too, and that I'm also healing them as I'm healing myself. It's just also humbling to me, and it is sacred.
Well, something as basic as the kids come and ask you a question, and you'll
Mm-hmm.
notice that, and I hear moms do this all the time, the first answer is no. You cut them off, you didn't even let them finish their sentence.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Why did you just say no?
Yeah.
You know what? I don't really know why I said no.
I know.
Yeah.
It really is.
Or you walk in a room in your
Yeah.
children's room and you say, "What are you doing?" Or, "Oh, that looks interesting. Are you creating something beautiful?"
Mm-hmm.
Or, "Those are interesting colors. What inspired you to use red?" But instead,
Yeah.
"What are you doing?" Or they come home, they tell you a story. "What did you do?" Do you see? And then you catch yourself thinking, wow, I show up as a prosecutor to my kids. Whether they're 3, they're 5, they're 10, they're 20, it doesn't matter. I'm prosecuting them because I'm
Yeah.
asking why questions. Why questions are prosecutorial questions. So the question is, why do I show up in my first interaction with my children after school, when I walk into a room, whatever, and I ask why questions? Why do I say that? I'm always putting them in a position to defend themselves. Of course, they don't want to be around me.
That's really fascinating.
But
And
that's a
that,
simple application to what we're talking about. But
right,
instead
right.
of getting upset because they won't answer us, well, why aren't they answering me? How am I showing up to those conversations? And that's what rest is about. Relational, emotional, spiritual truth about you with you first. Before you try to fix all these other relationships, we need to
Yes.
step into fixing us.
Yeah.
And yes, that's where it leads us into these generational questions about our ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
appreciate you continuing to bring it full circle.
Yeah.
But the question is, how are we showing up to these basic and simple conversations and interactions with our husbands, with our children, with our
Yeah.
coworkers?
For me, it's with the fruits of the spirit, with love and patience and
But before
what
you
that
can
means.
bear the fruits of the spirit, you got to put to death the work of your flesh.
Yes.
And if you
Yeah.
don't step into rest, you can't tell the
Right.
difference between those two things. You just can't.
Mhm. Yeah. And even with rest, how I kind of connected it earlier to it being for me, literal rest and to not be go, go, go all the time and to take time to go for my walk, knowing that it will allow me to be more present with
Reflective. Ask yourself
my family.
questions. Because what does it mean to be present with yourself? Ask yourself questions. Why did you do that? Why did you think that? Where did that come from? Ask
Mm,
yourself those questions. Because you become curious about yourself. You know, I talk about my husband never showing up, but I never once asked him, I noticed you don't show up for this and this and this. Have I made it difficult for you to show up?
yeah.
Am I a source of encouragement to you or a source of judgment? So when we talk about showing up, when we talk about reflection, these are big words. We need to start defining these things.
Mhm.
What does that mean to go in a walk and abide and be by myself and ask myself these questions?
So finding rest, going on the walk, asking myself questions. We use the word wholeness a lot. So peeling back the layers of what does wholeness mean and how do we find wholeness? And when we go on the walk, what questions do we ask ourselves? And when we find answers to those questions, what do we do with it? It's the action, it's the, what do we do with the answers that we're finding for ourselves that are hard and like we mentioned, very intimate sometimes. What do we do with that? And that's what ultimately is going to lead us to rest, the relational, emotional, spiritual truth. And
It's
so that's
transformative.
yeah, that's our goal is transformative. And that's the word that anyone who's been through this pilgrimage, through this journey of rest that comes up all the time.
There's stories we tell ourselves from the experiences we've had, and they're the
Yeah.
consequence of how we experience life with all the resources we have. But there is a quiet, still voice that informs us. And I believe it's more connected to the spiritual realm that informs our heart. And it's
Yeah.
our heart that is always trying to reconcile the deepest core root of our convictions and the experiences we're having. Our heart and our soul has this embryonic relationship, right? But this conversation is kind of going on back and forth and back and forth. So there is this conscience that's informing us. There's this soul that's having these experiences, largely informed by the central nervous system. And there's this conversation that's going on back and forth. And I have to say, it takes a lot of courage to silence all of our good intentions and embrace our deepest convictions. Because one, our best intentions tends to be regulated by the opinions of man. But I think the importance of these walks you go on and these quiet, reflective moments that you have, and I think we all do, and as mothers, I
Mm,
think it's tough to have those times. But when we have those times, I think we really need to listen very carefully to the deepest convictions that speak so clearly,
yeah.
and then displace our loudest fears,
Hmm.
because they'll usurp our convictions. So it
Yeah.
takes strength and courage to have our convictions override our fears. Connected to the fears is always the opinion of men. Connected to our deepest convictions is the voice of God, the voice of our conscience, the voice of
Yeah.
our highest ideals. And I think we need to distinguish the difference between those two things to become women of substance and to raise up the next generation to really rise up in the face of unprecedented confusion, chaos, and disease. I think as women, we need to lead the way. As
Mm,
wives, we need to come under the authority of our husbands with the enormous power that we have to really become one whole. So our
yeah.
children can be strengthened by those things. So I'm so thankful that you do the hard work that you do behind the scenes, really
Mm.
stretching and striving to reconcile language that our listening audience can apply things. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm learning so much and it's just as beautiful of a journey for me to experience rest, working alongside and working on the marketing side of rest. And it's a beautiful challenge. It's a beautiful journey that I'm going on myself. And I just appreciate it so much. And I appreciate you having me on the podcast. So thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for your beautiful words, the amazing layouts, and just for the dedication. I know recently you decided to really clean up your schedule so you had more time to invest in this because you see the value of the
Mhm.
messaging. And I want to thank you for that from the bottom of my heart.
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Virginia.
God bless you.
Thank you.
If you have questions or comments about what you learned in today's episode, or for updates about rest in this podcast, please visit our Instagram or Facebook at The Place of Rest. If you would like more information about Virginia or to support and join the cause of rest, please go to theplaceofrest.com/donate or call 949-289-5935. We'd like to say a special thank you to Steve R.E.S.T for the use of his music for this podcast. The song is Psalm 23 from his album, Keys of David. Thank you for listening to Rest with Virginia Dixon. We'll see you next week.